Do you want to have the confidence to truly rock retirement? Well, I'm going to show you how on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Hey there, welcome to the show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. I'm excited you're here to continue this month-long theme on inflation and retirement. So if you are new to the show or you're just hopping in to listen after a while, we started 2 episodes ago in talking about what inflation is and how do you measure it. Last week, we talked about ways that inflation impacts your retirement. And today we're going to dive into how do you build a strategy to manage inflation. And then next week, we will finish up with some tactical things you might consider within your larger strategy. So that's where we're at right now. Now, looking forward to March of 2022, which is crazy to say, I've been getting a lot of questions on what is a pie cake? What do you mean by feasible? What is a plan of record? What is agile? Understandably so, because I think about this stuff all day long, every day. And you may be new to the show, or maybe you have heard these tidbits and you're understanding them. So I thought I'd take a month or so, in addition to answering your questions on the show, dive into the fundamentals of retirement planning. Other than getting a lot of questions, what made me think about this? I'm doing a lot of personal work, which I always do. And I have these virtues that I recite to myself and write on and noodle on. And one of them is zest. This comes from Brian Johnson's Optimize, a platform I'm a big fan of. And when I acknowledge the word zest every morning in my meditation, I say this: I dominate my fundamentals and I have heroic energy. And within the context of that, my fundamentals are eating, sleeping, and moving. If I can dominate and really work on improving my eating, my sleeping, and my moving, I'm going to set myself up to have energy, to be more intentional, to have better self-mastery. It's the fundamentals to have. So I thought, well, in retirement planning, we have all these things we talk about. We should always go back to the fundamentals, because if you can get the fundamentals of building your retirement strategy and then being agile in how you manage it, that is 90+% of the way there. The fundamentals are everything. So I thought we'd spend some time talking about what those are, either to catch you up to speed because you're not sure what I'm talking about. It happens a lot. Or if you're familiar with these, reacquainting yourself with them, because there's never over. So that's what we're going to do next month. But before we do any of that, let's get on to this month's topic of how do we build a strategy to manage inflation? So before we talk specifically about strategy, I want to talk about a few bookends to frame things for you. I just finished Anti-Fragile probably 3-4 weeks ago. And Nassim Taleb, it's a great book. One of the big points that I drew from the book was this concept of noise versus signals. Noise versus signals. And he says in his book, in business and economic decision-making, data causes severe side effects. Data is now plentiful thanks to connectivity. And as data increases, we get immersed in it. A not well discussed property of data is that it's toxic in large quantities. And he would argue even in moderate quantities. He says the more frequently you look at data, the more noise you are disproportionately likely to get, rather than the valuable part called the signal. Hence, the higher the noise to signal ratio. So the more you pay attention to the economy, to the markets, to inflation, the more you read on the narrative that's being talked about, because we're so connected and information is transmitted, information and opinion is transmitted instantaneously, the more difficult it's going to be for you to actually see a signal. This really hit home with me last night. Shauna was out of town and I was watching The Social Dilemma. It's a documentary about the creation and objectives of the major social media platforms, Facebook, Google, so on. They're designed to keep our attention. And I think that, coupled with what we're talking about here, is really important to understand. I think we get it intellectually, but I don't know if we always appreciate how influential it is in our life. It's very dangerous to overreact to noise. That will just cause us to, one, be anxious, make lots of decisions, increase costs, increase taxes, and increase the possibility that we can't rock retirement. So I think this is really important in this discussion of strategy versus tactics. So let's do another framing of what we mean by strategy versus tactics before we get into some strategic things for retirement. What is a strategy? Well, strategy is how you will achieve your long-term goals. It's your overarching plan to create the masterpiece. A tactic are small steps that you take within a short time frame. So a real simple explanation is a strategy is a recipe for what you want to create for your life. But if you go into a supermarket with your recipe, you're much more apt to come back out with ingredients that are coherently put together in the right portions to create a very delicious meal, right? That's rocking retirement. You have a recipe that you've thought out or you found, you've customized it to your taste, and then you went and bought the ingredients to help you create the dish. Same thing goes with retirement planning. You need to have a good strategy. What is your vision for what you want? And I know we've had that experience of having a recipe going to a grocery store. Now contrast that experience with having no recipe and being anxious and hungry, jittery, maybe you're hangry, and you walk into a grocery store. You get your basket and you start going through. You don't really know what you want, but you're a little anxious. You know you got to eat and you're really, really hungry. What are you going to grab? First thing that you walk in, oh, bananas. I like bananas. Throw them in the cart. Oh, hummus. I love hummus. Throw it in the cart. Oh, look at this end cap with Cheetos. Oh, I love Cheetos. Throw them in the cart. Lima beans. Sure. Throw it in the cart. You get the point. And then you get to the checkout counter. You buy all this stuff. You go home and you've tactically bought all of these things that helped address your anxiety and your hungriness in the moment. But when you put it all on the counter, you can't make a recipe for it. Maybe you bought a ton of carbs. So now you're eating stuff that's just horrible for you and that makes you feel really bad afterwards. That's the difference between strategy and tactics. Tactics are really important. Maybe I'll add a little of this to my recipe. Maybe I'll take this out of my recipe to enhance it for myself. Tactics are important, but only within the context of a strategy. So let's talk about where we're at the moment. Well, I just saw in the Wall Street Journal the other day that we had 7.5% inflation. Find the headline here. Yeah, it was a Wall Street Journal last week. So the U.S. inflation rate accelerates to a 40-year high of 7.5%. It starts off a relentless surge in U.S. inflation reached another 4-decade high this month, accelerating to a 7.5% annual rate as strong consumer demand collided with pandemic-related supply disruptions. So January, relative to the January last year, we had 7.5% increase in prices. That is scary. That is, I got to do something about that. And you don't just read an article like this in isolation because the narrative is everywhere. We need to do something about that. Inflation is a big deal. When in reality, from a strategic standpoint, inflation is always a big deal. It's going to be high, it's going to be low, it's going to go directions we don't even understand. So when you read something like this, it spurs you to say, it's like a rhinoceros charging you. 7.5% inflation at rhinoceros charging us. The natural reaction is get the heck out of the way of that thing. That's a human response that we've had for eons. Just like when the markets are falling and we're losing money, that's another rhinoceros, even bigger, charging us. And you're going to react. Get the heck out of the way of that. That's why you got to have a strategy. So you don't just react out of being hungry. And also one reason is that we really can't predict the future. We can't. This reminds me of another article that I read recently from Jason Zweig in the Wall Street Journal called The Trouble with the Stock Market Bubble. And Jason is a very thoughtful, excellent financial columnist, very well respected. I've read him for years and I like his thinking. He is a reasonable guy. And he wrote this article and it starts off, wow, was I ever wrong? Over a decade ago, I wrote a column about how to estimate the future returns of the stock market. And he said he read this survey that people expected, this is back in 2010, that markets were going to be really good. And he sneered at it. What are we smoking and when will we stop? He thought. Jason says, I thought 6% would be generous, adding that faith in fanciful high returns amount to fairy tale expectations. And then here we are over 10 years, ending December 31st, 2019, he says, and the S&P 500 returns 13.6% a year. Almost exactly what those investors I mocked had expected. It doesn't mean that the investors were right and he were wrong, but Jason's a thoughtful guy. And he said, I also made a more basic mistake, relying too mechanically on the past and estimating the future. And he references Robert Shiller, a finance professor at Yale University, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, measures how expensive stocks are by taking the S&P 500 index, dividing by the average of its past 10 years of earnings, and adjusting both the price and the earnings for inflation. And according to this gauge, created by one of the smartest economic minds in the world, 10 plus years ago, stocks were very overvalued. And here we are 10 years later after amazing returns. And according to the CAPE, C-A-P-E, stocks are just even more overvalued. And his article goes into depth as to the logic behind that, etc. But here's the point of why I'm telling you this. This is Jason Zweig, an incredible financial journalist, very well respected and rightfully so, and a Nobel Prize winner of economics with a team behind him being thoughtful with decades of research, and they were totally wrong. And that doesn't mean anything to them. That doesn't disparage them in any way. But the point is, and I think Jason sums it up fairly well in his last sentence of the article, he says, trimming your stocks a bit as they rise always makes sense. But dumping all your shares because they are near record highs makes sense only in a world of perfect certainty, which exists nowhere but in fairy tales. That's really important when you think about strategy versus tactics. It doesn't mean we can't be tactical and lean a little bit certain directions, but it should never change our wholesale strategy. That goes for stock valuations, but it also goes for inflation and where it happens to be at this time and what all the predictions are going forward. We really don't know. And that's one reason why, personally and professionally, we adopted an agile approach to get away from looking at these predictions and just trying to make lots of little smart decisions in a consistently and incremental fashion. So from a strategy standpoint, a lot of the stuff shouldn't change from what every day is. Maybe we do a few things tactically, and we talk about that next week. So what is the strategy to manage inflation? Well, it's the same strategy that we talk about all the time. First off, what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish here? That is for you to rock retirement. Have the outcomes in your life, the experiences you want to fund between now and when you pass. And within that context, we want to make sure you can do that while having a great life today, making the most of today, but balancing that with having confidence that you can be okay tomorrow, which you're never in perfect balance there. We don't want you to get too far one direction or the other direction because tomorrow isn't promised to anybody. And so if those are the two goals, strategically, we have to have a plan to manage the two big financial risks. The first risk is, we'll call it sequence of return risk. The stock markets or risky assets going down in value early, like today. That's the near-term risk. And the long-term risk, which is inflation, the slow degradation of your purchasing power in the dollar that you have. Because if you put it all under a mattress to avoid the markets going down, what will happen is you could wake up 20 years from now when you're older and have that dollar worth maybe 50 cents. So those are the two big risks that strategically we have to balance, and we're never going to do it perfectly. So what's the strategy to manage inflation? Well, strategy number one is we want to dedicate a good portion of our assets to things that have historically battled inflation or kept up with inflation over very long periods of time. So when we're trying to manage inflation strategically, we're only worried about the long term there, right? The long-term degradation of your dollar. I hope I'm using that word right. Nicole's going to tell me if I'm not. Anyway, you get the point. So we're not worried about losing money today up and down value-wise. So the assets that we're going to use to battle inflation are going to be long-term assets that are for your future self. And those are going to be equities that will be very diversified because companies participate in the economy. And even though in the short term, if inflation rises, the inputs, the things that they have to buy to produce your Apple or your computer, those will increase. And that might hurt them on the short term because the cost of their goods go up. They have pricing power. So over time, that will all adjust, even if they get hurt in the short term. Same thing with real estate. Real estate would be something from a long-term basis that can help in this strategy. If inflation rises, which causes interest rates to rise, real estate prices can get hurt. And that is okay on the short term because one nice thing about real estate, especially income real estate, is over time, it has been a good hedge or fighter of inflation because the value of properties go up with inflation. And if you are an income producing property, you can increase your rents with inflation over a very long period of time. And something more mundane, but inflation protected bonds that although you're not getting a great yield, if I have $1 today and I put it in a mattress, it's not going to be worth $1 20 years from now. It's going to be worth 50 cents. But if I put $1 in an inflation protected bond, it may not earn any money, but it'll still be worth $1 in 20 years because it has an inflation adjustment to it. Talk a little bit about that next week. Or you could use some of your sources to buy guaranteed income so you can have a steady flow of cash flow so you're not dependent on money in the near term. Those are some strategies that we have to have baked into your overall retirement strategy. So in this portion of your strategy, we are accepting, hey, we may lose money on paper when markets go down this year, next year, or the year after. That's uncomfortable. The second part of the strategy is to have assets that give you certainty in the near term, meaning that we have money to pay year one's bills in retirement, years two bills, and so forth. This is the income floor that we talk about. And we'll define that next month when we get into the fundies. So we need to have money that is safe in terms of coming back to us in the near term. And this is the point of the contingency fund, building the income floor and having all that mapped out. So we accept that, hey, inflation is going to be there potentially in year three. But you know what? It's going to be more of an annoyance in the near term because inflation's scary powers when it compounds over 20 years. But if I need to spend $100,000 in 3 years, I can't risk it in the markets. And if that $100,000 is actually 106 because of some inflation, that's annoying, but it's not going to be life threatening, most likely. So we accept inflation in the near term so we have the certainty of our money coming back. And a good retirement plan strategy does a couple of things. One is it helps you battle inflation on the long term. It helps you have certainty on getting money to fund your life on the near term. And it gives you enough flexibility so you can be agile as the world unfolds, but also as your life unfolds. That's a good strategy. Nowhere in that strategy are we worried about what the noise is on what's happening now, because you have enough data to position your assets to give you a framework for how you're going to pay for life now and how you're going to be able to pay for life after inflation really hits on that 30-year trajectory that we talked about last week. Now, next week, we're going to talk about some tactical things because having this great strategy doesn't mean you don't consider doing some tactical things. And the key with tactical things, just FYI, is to make sure you have enough rope to lean a certain direction one way or the other without giving yourself so much rope that you just blow up your whole strategy. And that's a little bit of an art. So we'll talk about that next week. This episode is sponsored by LTCI Partners. You can check them out at ltcipartners.com/RAM. We use LTCI Partners in our practice to help us build the strategy to manage the risk of having a long-term care event later in life, whether that's a catastrophic event or simply that you need to spend money on some long-term care services. And what I like about LTCI Partners is, one, they have a heart of a teacher, so they can help thoughtfully think through your current policy or what policies might be appropriate. And two, that they survey multiple insurance companies to find something that might be right for you. So if you want to build a long-term care strategy, I encourage you to check out ltcipartners.com/RAM. Back when we were talking to candidates for Retirement Plan Live, which we had a number, 100 plus people submitted the form, and I didn't get to talk with all of them, but blown away by that. And I appreciate everybody's generosity in wanting to share their story and help other people. So first off, I want to make sure I say that. But I spoke with one gentleman who has gone through a lot in his life. So he went from he and his wife planning his imminent retirement to her suddenly passing, all within the span of less than a year. And I can't imagine that, for one, what that journey was like. I've witnessed it with clients and personally with others I've known. I haven't witnessed that personally. And when we were chatting, he thought it might be helpful to you to hear his perspective of, hey, I'm starting off, my wife and I, we planned for years, we're about to go, to all of a sudden having to navigate something that none of us ever want to navigate. So let's go chat with him and learn his perspective. And you may not be in the situation, most likely you're not, but let's learn from his perspective so we can all rock retirement, as I'm sure he will. So Dom, I appreciate you coming on to share your experience. And I set this up a little bit before you've come on. Why do you think it's important to share the last year and a half that you've gone through?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is something we talked about earlier, is this is a financial planning podcast, and that's your audience you're trying to reach. And part of that is you're always planning for retirement, what you're doing to set yourself up for success so that you don't have to worry about money. You can go do the things you put off and waited to do for 30 to 40 years. And then for me, this time last year, my wife and I were planning, I'm going to retire in 2022. We're going to go do this, go do that. We got money saved up to do all that. And then in May of 2021, she passes away suddenly. And it just rocked my world. So,
and I appreciate your willingness to share this perspective, because here we are not quite a year later. It's January 2022 now. So put me back to January 2021. Were you retired yet?
No, we had been talking about me retiring. I had just taken a new job within the same company I'd worked for the past 30 years. And so I was actually starting to work from home. I worked for a nuclear power utility, working at a power plant off and on for over the past 30 years. And so we talked about retiring and getting through the COVID, the pandemic, and then traveling and doing things like that. And another aspect of where we were last year at this time is my wife's parents had moved to be near us about 8 years ago. And so we were caring for them. Fortunately, they're in pretty good shape still. And another thing we talked about was renting an RV or doing something like that and giving that a trial run to see if, one, could we tolerate each other close quarters for a couple of weeks? And two, is it something we really wanted to do? So that's really where we were in last year at this time, is really looking forward to the next phase or next chapter in our lives. We had been married at that time over 31 years. So, which
I'm at 31 years right now, actually.
Yeah.
So some of the dreams that you two had were to test out the RV, be able to help take care of her parents and be around for them. What are some of the other things that you two had aspired to as you were working and saving?
Yeah, well, part of it was personally for me and doing stuff with her. We tried to volunteer off and on, doing different things. And that's always a challenge when you're working full time. You just can't make a rock solid commitment to another obligation, especially when it's a volunteer obligation. So we wanted to volunteer our time and help others. We still have our two kids, or we have two adult children, and working with them as they navigate through their life experience as well. And then my parents are still alive as well. They live in Kansas, so they're near my youngest brother. So I got two younger brothers. And so part of that was traveling to see my parents, taking care of her parents, seeing family, doing more of the stuff we kept talking about and putting off while I was working full time, and she was taking care of everything else.
Did you have a retirement date when you were back in January? Did you know when you were going to retire, or roughly?
Yeah, it was going to be sometime this year in 2022. And a lot of that had to do with the way, I'm high enough in my company. There were certain benefits of retiring at a certain time in a given year. So I was going to work through this new job for the year, see how that went. And then more than likely, I was just going to go ahead and retire and just look at doing something else a lot less stressful than what I had been doing.
Yeah. No, I didn't ask you. How old are you?
I'm 59 and a half.
59 and a half. Okay. Magical age of retirement.
Yep.
Not just last January, but prior. What was your wife's view of you retiring or slowing down? What would she have said?
Yeah, well, this working from home was going to be a bit of that trial run because I usually get up early in the morning. I'm gone till late in the evening. And so we saw each other nights and weekends. And then being around quite a bit working from home with this new position I was fulfilling, she did make the comment that you're starting to infringe upon my kingdom a little bit here. And so there's got to be some boundaries. And we worked towards that. And that was really what she was concerned about was, what are you going to do when you retire? I mean, if you're not going to be, because you work all the time, what are you going to do when you're not working all the time and fill that time rather than just sit around here and bug me? That was her perspective. So.
You both have.
And I've heard that a lot on the different people I've talked with, especially the working spouse and the non-working spouses. Potential conflict that could be there of both people being at home and trying to find things to do to occupy their time.
Yeah, you both had your own kingdom.
That's right.
So explain to me what happened with your wife.
Well, so she actually died of a brain aneurysm. So I was home. She had gone to my daughter's townhome to take care of her dog for the day. She had made me lunch, came upstairs where I had my office and said, hey, I'm off. And last thing I said to her, I said, hey, I'll see you later for dinner and love you. And she walked out the door, and that was the last time we spoke. And she actually had the aneurysm there at my daughter's house. She was talking to a friend of ours, and the friend texted me and said, hey, I was talking to her. And then all of a sudden it just went silent. We wondered if she was at home. I tried to text her, no response. I drive over there, can't get the door open because I don't have a key to my daughter's place. I can hear my daughter's dog, no response. Call 911. They come in, she's unconscious, and take her to the hospital, and she never regained consciousness. So they put her on a ventilator. But after they did all the testing and things, when I went back the next morning, because you still couldn't spend the night there in the ICU, and the doctor said that she was basically, I got the diagnosis right then, and they were doing the final testing that she was brain dead. And that was probably the worst thing I had to do in my entire life, was call my kids and my in-laws and my parents and tell them that my wife was basically dead. And so that was probably the toughest thing I ever had to do as a parent and as a father for my two kids, to tell them that their mother was gone.
And so suddenly, just out of the blue.
Yep. No issues beforehand, nothing in her family history, just one of those things that just happened. And there's nothing, even the doctor said if she had been in the hospital when this all happened, there was nothing we could do to save her. That's how quick it was. If there was a positive out of this, she was an organ donor. And so she was able to donate organs. They kept her body alive for another day and a half as they made arrangements to do that. So other people were helped as a result of her death. But it's just one of those things that you never plan on. You check the box on your license, and you never really plan on being that person, but she was able to do that for others. So that's one thing we're truly grateful for.
I don't really know what to ask next, because that's such a moment. And yeah, I can't imagine. I'm home. I've been married 31 years like you, and my wife is out and about. Yeah. I can't imagine.
Yeah. Well, what I tell people, I'm unfortunate in that I've got several friends that have lost their wives, and so that live in the same general area. We all work together. They've retired before me, but one thing we did talk about is that you go through all this planning, financial planning, and getting ready to do all that, and you never really plan. We always plan for me passing away first. I mean, that's,
yeah, you're the guy.
Man always dies first. Leave your wife with all your money, and she has hopefully a great rest of her life. But it's going to happen to every couple that stays together. You're either going to get divorced or someone's going to die. And we never really considered this sequence of events to occur, and
much less so early.
That's right. She was 54 years old. So for us that are in their 50s, that's not very old.
No, I'm about to be 55. That's not old at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now here we're fast forwarding this. That was May. And now we're in January of 22 when you and I are talking. What perspective do you have as a result of those two things and coinciding that you think people should know?
Yeah. Well, the one cliche that everybody talks about is, hey, make every moment count. But really, when something like this happens, you take that to heart, that you don't know when my wife did not expect to not come home that day. And for her, every moment counted up to that point. And so I'm trying to make every moment count going forward, because I don't know when my last breath is going to be drawn. So
So how does that
that's
manifest
just one thing we all
itself?
take for granted.
How does that manifest itself for you and making every moment count?
Yeah, just taking the opportunities, I think, to one, spend more time with the people we love, because we talk about that. Hey, we'll get together whenever. And that's one thing my brothers, and I've got a cousin that was close to both of us, that we've said we are going to be committed to taking the time to talk more to one another and spend more time together. That my two younger brothers, were scattered all over the U.S. I'm in Georgia, one's in Kansas, and one's in Arizona. And so spending more time with them, talking with them, and seeing my parents. I've seen my parents more probably in the past year than I have in the past 10 years, just because of distance and things like that. Certainly spending more time with my children, and then just taking time to do some of the things that I said, hey, I'll wait till later just because I'm too busy now. Well, I'm not going to be busy enough now. I'm going to go do some of those things and not put it off.
Is there anything that surprised you in terms of your outlook as a result of all of this, in terms of how you're doing things? Are you more spontaneous than you used to be, or?
Well, what I've told folks is I think I'm more empathetic to others' circumstances in life. I've had friends that spouses have died, parents have died, kids have died, things like that. And I saw it with people interacting with me. One, not knowing what to say, didn't want to call you and bother you. And so I think for me is trying to be more responsive when people have a situation like that. I didn't know how to act either. And I think I've got a better sense of that now. And the one example I have for that is a friend of mine, his wife had passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. He called me every day for almost 3 to 4 months. And we didn't talk long. He'd call, hey, how you doing? You need anything? Just checking up on you. That was it. And that was probably the best thing a person could have ever done for me, And so that's one thing I'm trying to do now when I interact with others is it's not, I don't think, spending hours with individuals that have suffered great loss. It's just having that touch point that, hey, I'm there. If you want to spend hours together, I'm fine with that. If not, it's a touch point. I just want to check in with you and make your day just a little bit better than hopefully it was before.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, I think it's just that basic human need we have for contact and socialization that I think it's part of our culture that we suck at. I don't know of any other way to put it, but we are not very good at showing empathy to people that have lost because we don't know what to say. We're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing. We won't say it at the right time. The person is too busy, whatever that means, or just too in a state of grief that they can't talk. And I think sometimes that all we need is just that touch point, whether it's for 5 minutes, like my friend did for several months, or, hey, can you come over and just sit with me and drink a beer? And we don't have to talk. I just want that comfort of life going on around me while I'm in the middle of a really traumatic event.
Yeah, that's well said. That's well said. It is awkward.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yeah. And it shouldn't be, right?
No, but we struggle with it.
Yeah.
I know I did individually.
Well, the one last question I have for you is, has it changed your perspective around money and planning?
Yeah, I think a little bit. Part of that, once again, was we always thought that I would be the first one to go. And I'm fine financially. I mean, because I had her set up. She was going to be great financially. We didn't carry life insurance on her. We had life insurance on me because I was the primary breadwinner. But I think from a financial standpoint, there was no change in what I was planning to do from a financial perspective. I just think that part of the planning we should have taken into account is what happens if something does happen to her. And we really never considered that. And so I think that was probably a gap we had on our part. But fortunately for me, it was not as significant. And the other piece is that we had adult children. I don't know what I would do if my kids were still young and I'm, one, still working, two, have small children, have to deal with. And there are people like that today that have lost spouses, husbands, wives, and having to manage households, manage the grief. And I personally cannot imagine that. And I'm grateful that I don't have to do that, but there are many people that have to deal with that and still make money to keep things going. So that I think is a big challenge for a lot of folks that are not in a similar situation where I was, age-wise and certainly financially.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had the opportunity to walk a little bit of life with people that have lost a spouse, some through disease, some very quickly in your case. And part of that journey, the one thing that I've observed is, especially you were married 31 years. It was your sense of self is combined with us, right?
That's right.
you're going to be creating a new version of yourself. You're not putting the old version to bed. You're just creating a new version of Dom as right now a single man, which is weird even to say. And you're finding your sea legs and knowing that you're still going to have a great life as you explore that and to honor it. So well, I'm excited to maybe get a chance to get updates on how you're creating that great life. I appreciate you sharing this perspective. Anything I failed to ask or that you wanted to share?
Yeah, there's one other thing that my kids and I discovered as we tried to memorialize my wife, and that was we had no video of her talking. And with all the technology we have nowadays with these darn cell phones, iPads, et cetera, we don't have any video of her just, of any of us for that matter. I mean, so that's one thing I've encouraged people to do is use the technology you have available and take video of one another. And then people don't like to be on camera and talk and they just don't like it. But I think it's one of those things that I would love to have had 30 seconds of her having a conversation that I don't have, and I will never get that back. And so that's probably the one thing I wish I would have done. And I've encouraged others to sit down at a holiday or something and take some video and save that and put it somewhere. Don't keep it on your phone. Put it on the cloud somewhere and save that so that you have that as a future, because we're not going to be around forever, even though we sometimes think we will be. But that's probably my biggest regret.
That's an excellent point. Video or audio just to hear and see and feel them, because that's how you can really feel them, right?
That's right.
Yeah, very well said. Dom, thank you so much. And I hope you have a very good 22.
All right, Roger. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. So in the next 7 days, I'm just going to ask you to check yourself. Check yourself. If you're worried about inflation and reading these articles, check yourself and see, am I reacting too tactically to this? Am I trying to dive out of the way of the rhinoceros, not even looking where I'm diving to? Or am I thinking strategically, understanding that this is a little bit of a season and I'll have multiple seasons? So I just wanted you to evaluate yourself a little bit so you can ground yourself so you can manage inflation in retirement. So here we are, a month and a half into the year. And I've been trying to build some habits, some of these fundies that we talk about. And I actually was journaling this morning, and I have actually kicked the social media habit. I have not been on a social media channel since the beginning of the year. And I feel really good about that. So much so that I'm not tracking it day by day because I don't even have the temptation to do that, which is exciting. So my new thing that I put on my daily tracking, other than my fundamentals and things, is I want to write for at least 10 minutes a day. And that could be a journal, that could be writing on a planning topic, writing on a business topic, just for myself, not for anything out there. And the cool thing about this, and what I like about it, is that I said 10 minutes. You could literally put, I want to write for 1 minute. And this is a concept I learned from a book called Tiny Habits. And honestly, I didn't finish the book. If you watch the TED Talk called Tiny Habits, that's good enough. And essentially just give yourself a little micro habit that you pair with something you normally do. He used the example of whenever he goes to the bathroom, he does 2 push-ups. So he pairs it. So bathroom, push-ups, bathrooms, push-ups. And then as soon as he does his push-ups, he does a little awesome, congratulates himself. And it sounds really cheesy, but it actually works because I have found myself going awesome when I do something. But the idea is you want to, 1, pair it with something you already do. And 2, don't make it so big. Don't say I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day. Just do 1 a day. Do 1 sit-up a day. And then what will naturally happen is you'll grow in that habit and do more and more. I definitely have found this with my reading. So check out Tiny Habits, TED Talk. I'm feeling good about that, although I still got a lot to work on. And I hope your year is starting off well too. Talk to you next week. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.